So I wanted to introduce our first speaker tonight, Evon Peters. Of course, my notes are unfortunately no longer organized here. So Evon is the UAF Vice Chancellor for Rural Community and Native Education at UAF. Evon is from the village of Arctic Village, and that's a small community about 100 miles north of the Arctic Circle, where he served as chief for 3 years. Evon is a UAF alumni. He is Gwich'in, and he has been involved in a wide range of nonprofit organizations, both domestically and internationally, along with his wife, including currently serving as a board member to the Gwich'in Council International, which is a permanent member of the Arctic Council. So thank you very much, Evon.
Evon Peter Oji. Vashank Ogotsanithli, God Tamanwichi. Za Nishigan Jitshuithli. Should see Stephen say hoods at all. I'd treat. I'd Shitsu Catherine Peter, I'd say. Shahanda Adeline Rayboff carry I'd Shit Ernest Rayboff. I'd chad ini begay. Shitchi nai nana ish. Lil. I'd Anaba. I'd Shidinji itlak olab chigionta. Za gishigan jitsuithli. Jukdrin. Jaka. Chinachutana. Gwich'in Gonan. It's always less pressure to give a speech in your language. To a group who doesn't know what you're saying. I said kind things about all of you. My name's Evon Peter. Before I begin sharing with you just a few remarks, I want to begin with honoring. I love that quote that you began with, Gwen. You know, the concept, the idea of what we honor grows, something along those lines. For too many years over this last decades, couple of centuries, we really haven't been honoring the first peoples of the Arctic and the lands upon which we live now. The first people of this land, this area in my language, we call it Tanan, are the Chinachotana people. You might recognize that first word. Kind of sounds like the river that cuts through the middle of the city, right? The China River. That's where the name comes from. The Chinachotana are among the Dana people. The Dana people make up about 11 nations in interior Alaska, spanning from the Brooks Mountain Range all the way down to the Cook Inlet, to the lower Yukon, and out all the way into Canada. We're commonly referred to as the Athabascan people, but Athabascan is really a language family spanning all the way down to the Navajo and the Apache in Arizona. So I am coining the term Dana to refer to our own people. So the Dana are the people of the interior. For those of you who are not from Alaska or who are guests here, welcome to Alaska. Welcome to the interior, the land of the Dana. I come from a Dana nation to the north of here, the Gwich'in. The village I come from is called Vashanko in my language. Some of the villages got to keep their native names in Alaska if you look at a map, and others didn't. And sometimes I think maybe it was just, they were asked what's the name of your village, and if you said Neetsaii, they said, oh, Neetsaii. We can kind of turn that into an English word. And if your village was called Vashanko, they said, okay, no. You're going to be Arctic Village. And I think because my village that I come from is called Arctic Village is why I got invited to speak at the Arctic Energy Summit. I'm not sure, but and so I'm really grateful to have been asked to come to share just a few remarks. So I got to grow up in this village of Gwich'in, small village. When I was growing up there, there was less than 100 people. I lived with my grandfather, Neetsaii. His name was Neetsaii through his whole life, but then he was always full of life. He couldn't speak English much. He was a historian of our people, a knowledge bearer. He could tell you stories of hundreds of years ago. And I got to live in a little one-room cabin with him as a boy. No electricity, although we did have a little boombox with D batteries, and I grew up on Pink Floyd and Elton John. I can still sing whole Elton John songs. It's pretty shocking to people when they give me a guitar. I got to grow up there. At that time, it was an incredible time to grow up in that particular village because we would move up onto the side of a mountain hill we call Gwich'in. In my language, that means where the tree line meets the ridge, and the mountain becomes bare up top. And our people would move up onto there and set camps up, and we'd hunt for the caribou and make dry meat. As a boy, I'd run from camp to camp, family to family, and sit there and eat fresh fried meat cooked on the open fire, as other meat would be hanging on the meat drying racks. We'd go up, the hunters would go up further, and they'd hunt the caribou and bring them back down. If you go up on that ridge from Gwich'in, you go out, there's a peak up top, it's called Gwich'in. It's a caribou trail. I remember once as a boy being up on top of there, and it was like being on top of the world. And I could see down through the valley, my village, on the river, and the Brooks Mountain Range, an expanse. It's an experience of freedom that I wonder sometimes if people who do not grow up in a space where you can walk hundreds of miles in any direction and not see any development or roads or fences or cement, experience what it feels like to be a truly free human being. But that's the experience I remember having as a young boy, standing on Gwich'in. And I remember one year I was looking out from the mountain, and it looked like there was ants coming over the hills and through the small spruce trees we have. And as they got closer, I realized it was some 40,000 caribou just migrating on their natural path back to our people. That's what sustained our people when I was growing up. I remember once in that cabin that we lived in, of course, there was no electricity, no running water. There's still no running water there, by the way. But my job as a young boy was to go down to the river and fill 5-gallon buckets, and I had a wood yoke that was over my shoulders like this. There'd be a 5-gallon bucket hanging on each side, and I would go down, fill them up, and pack them back up the hill. I remember one year the National Geographic came to my village. They were making a movie. It was called The Last Indians on the Last Frontier. I'm not joking. It was what it was called. And I remember I was going down and I was hauling water, and I just happened to be there while their film crew was walking through the village, and they came to me and they said, "What are you doing? Can we film you?" And I thought, oh, sure, you know. And so I go down there, but there's a film crew filming me, so usually I only fill the 5-gallon buckets up about a quarter to halfway. I'm a little boy. This time I filled them all the way up to the top. I hooked them on. It took everything I had to get up, and I made it up to the top of the hill, and I set it down, and the producer goes, "That was great. Can you dump out the buckets and do that again?" I looked at him, and in my mind I was thinking, Indians do things for a purpose. Why would I waste all my work? He must have seen the confusion on my face, and he said, "I'll pay you $10. The buckets got dumped out right away. At that time, you know, it was a quarter for a can of pop, and so $10 was a lot of money to a village boy. So anyways, I had these rich experiences of growing up among my people when our language was still the common language spoken among our people, before the days of electricity and running water, and we had dog teams, and I got to experience the world in a very different way. My mother came up to live with me for the last year that I was living in Arctic Village, and she realized that she wanted me to pursue a stronger school-based education, which I wasn't getting in the village. My education in the school at that time, from 6th to 12th grade, was one teacher. I did about 45 minutes of work in a day, and then I could do whatever I wanted to do after that. So she brought me to Fairbanks. And it was when I got here to Fairbanks that I began to realize that the world was really out of balance in many ways. We lived in low-income housing, went to the food bank for our food. I saw most of the other Native families there. Later, I would learn that this was called disparities, and that I realized there were disparities in economic disparities, health disparities, alcohol and substance abuse. When I was a young man, it was when suicide began to first become a major issue among my generation of young people. I've lost some of my own friends that way. And I remember realizing the moment when I decided that I needed to pursue knowledge and understanding of why we ended up in a situation that we're in today, so that I could help to chart a path, work with others to shape ideas to help pull us towards a better balance. At first, I thought it was just for my own people. Later, I realized that many other peoples around the world were also out of balance. Later, I learned that that's called research, which is perhaps the other reason I ended up on a stage in front of you this evening. There's so much that I learned along the way, but I'll just share through story one of the things that I came to understand. In the history of colonization, it came to our people, at least here and in many places in the Arctic, there was two concepts. One was an undermining of our ability as Native peoples to decide what type of a future we were going to live in our relationship to the land. And the other was a carrying out of a policy of assimilation on our people. And you couple that with some of the epidemics that came through, and it really disrupted the social, cultural, spiritual fabric that had sustained our people in one of the world's harshest environments for over 10,000 years. That kind of got shuffled. My mother, for example, was sent off to California at 6 years old. Before that, she was living on the land, only speaking in our language with her siblings and my grandparents. And when she got to California, she could only wear a dress, only speak English, and she had no communication with her siblings or her parents. I'm a father of 4 children. When each one of my children made it to that age of 6, I thought to myself, what would it be like for me to have my child sent away to some place like China and her not be able to communicate with her siblings or with me for years? 6 years total my mom spent out in the lower 48. Honestly, I can't even fathom it. It's hard for me to take a 2-week work trip, and I long for my children. I long for my family. I long for my land. I share this story because I think that sometimes, though people learn about some of this in the history books, it doesn't quite sit with them an understanding of what the emotional, psychological, and family impacts some of this history has had on our peoples. My stories are taking too long. So I want to just share a few thoughts that I think are the most important in relationship to the topic and the work that we're covering here. One is that we need to focus on supporting the healing and recovery within the Indigenous communities in the Circumpolar North. 2, we need to invest in the revitalization of our languages and our cultures. 1, because that helps us to become stronger and recover as a people, and 2, because embedded within our languages and our cultures is a world of Indigenous knowledge that I think very few people understand and comprehend how significant it is to what it is we're facing in the world today. We've developed complex social systems and ceremonies that have provided for our people to maintain personal balance and communal balance in small groups over thousands of years. And I think that's needed in the world today, an understanding of what it takes to get along with each other and retain a balanced life. The second piece I want to touch upon is self-determination. The Arctic Council was really progressive in allowing a seat at the highest decision-making table for Indigenous peoples in the 1990s. We were still fighting at that time for the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but the Arctic Council welcomed us to the table. In Alaska, self-determination over our health system has resulted in a world-class health system for Alaska Natives, with urban hospitals, regional hospitals, and village clinics. Through self-determination, Indigenous peoples can help best to take care of our own people, but also contribute to the challenges that we're facing collectively. And so I encourage, as we have this conversation about the importance of the contributions we're all going to make in addressing the issues of energy and sustainability in the far north, that we continue to have that place for Indigenous peoples to be at the table as equal decision-making partners, and also to be able to contribute the insight and wisdom that we have. I believe, at least here in the Arctic and in Alaska, make up the majority of the people that actually live in the Arctic. For that alone, I feel like it makes sense for us to be sure to have that place at the table as we discuss these things. So with that, I'm super excited about this evening to hear from the spread of scientists that we have here and the ongoing conversations through the Arctic Energy Summit and many of the other forums that will be being highlighted through these next couple of years, at least during the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. And I hope you really enjoy what it is that you learn and hear today, this evening. Thank you.